So we'll get kicked off here. Hi, everyone. This is Dave Thomas. I'm a solution executive on the Infor team here at Nordic, and want to thank you for joining our May 16th Informative Fridays. I'm focused on HR talent and IDM Private Space, delivered by Mike Smith. Mike, if you could go to the next slide, please. All right, just before we get started real quick, I'm just going to give everybody a quick introduction to Nordic Global. Nordic's a healthcare IT consulting firm. We offer services in the healthcare field to in a few different areas: strategic advisory, digital health, implementation support, and managed services. Today, we're focused on our Infor practice and services that we can deliver as our Infor partnership. Our Infor partnership's been in existence for over 2 decades. And we've got a lot of really good experience focused on the Infor Cloud Suite product. Today, we're going to focus on HR talent and IDM private spaces. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
Just your quick standard disclaimer that you guys are all used to from all these presentations. So the topic today, so I'll introduce myself. My name is Mike Smith. I'm the practice director in our ERP services practice. What we're going to talk about today is HRT, HR talent, and IDM private space. So first I'll cover what is the IDM private space, and then we'll go into why HRT is using the IDM private space, basically how it affects the users, changes for users, and then also cover document administration, things you need to look for, if you're an administrator or that you need to be aware of. Then we'll wrap up with any questions at the end. So what is the IDM private space? First of all, it's only available in multi-tenant cloud suite. And it's a secure area within IDM. And the reason it exists is because the default space within IDM didn't meet the criteria to store data such as PII and PHI data. And so if you use FSM, you've probably been using IDM for a long time, right? Invoices, POs, et cetera, are all stored in there. But HR talent couldn't use it because it didn't meet the security requirements, right? If you understand the default hierarchy within HR talent, it's, like as an employee, I would be able to see my documents, but not anybody else's. As a supervisor, I would be able to see documents from the people on my team, but not other teams, right? My direct reports, for example. If I'm a generalist or a HR administrator, I can see everything, but that hierarchy wasn't able to be supported by the default space within IDM, right? So something Infor working on for a few years as far as a way to secure the documents that are there and follow that same model. So what they did is they created a private space where the security is controlled by the source application. So whereas in FSM, you can go in and, into the document management application and, search for invoices, POs, et cetera. Private space does not allow that because it would kind of bypass the security model. So the way they built it is that an application, and so far I'm aware of only HRT, but this is something that could be leveraged by other Infor applications in the future. The application internally secures access to those documents, not directly in IDM. So this allows HRT to keep the same security model that they had in the past, whether you've customized it or not. The inherent HR talent security model is enforced on the documents. So if you've customized it, that stays in place because you're accessing the documents from HRT. It's just you're not storing the documents in HRT, which I'll get a little more into next. So why would HRT use, somebody mute? So why would HRT use the IDM private space? One of the biggest reasons is maintaining the database size and the cost that's associated with that. If you think about, text fields, descriptions, name, address, those things, You can have millions of those in a database and it doesn't get that big. But there's so many different document types now, credentials, benefits, appraisals, candidate documents, dozens of other employee documents. You start attaching all these documents into, thousands of employees and maybe new ones each year for appraisals and everything, that starts to add up a lot as far as storing it in a relational database. So those HRT databases were getting very large, and that would impact you as a client on cost eventually, right? Because those SaaS agreements come with tiers. And once your database exceeds a certain size, you're going to get moved up a tier and that's going to cost you more. And that also affects performance because all these documents are stored in the database. It makes it larger. It performs, some performance degradation as it gets bigger and bigger. So why IDM? So IDM under the covers uses AWS S3 storage, which is way less expensive than what database storage costs, right? And it's way more efficient to be able to access those documents. So you get performance improvements, especially with large organizations or people who have been on the product for a long time and keep adding these documents. By moving the documents to the IDM private space for storage, it's just way more efficient and your database costs and size are going to go down. And also data refreshes will be quicker, right? Because they're copying the entire database. You're going from a prod refresh to test or train, something like that. Some clients were getting massive databases. And so to copy that and do that refresh could take a significant amount of time. Just another fringe benefit by reducing that database size. I alluded to this before, but all interactions with the HR talent private space must go through HR talent. That's what keeps your documents secure, right? You're not able to access them directly in the private space. So again, the HRT security model is followed. The way you access and add, delete, et cetera, documents is all through HR talent. You're not interacting directly with IDM or the IDM private space in most cases. The one exception is there are some things that an administrator can do there, but they are not accessing the documents there, and we'll cover some of that later. What this allows for too, and we've done and continue to do multiple projects around this, is historical document migrations. So whether you're starting your project, you're in the middle of it, or you've been live for a while. In a lot of cases, you came from something else first. I mean, even if it was single tenant or on-prem GHR, right? You were likely using some type of third-party tool to store those documents in the past. It could be an entirely third-party system that you did, candidate onboarding in, or your employee appraisals was in a different system, your performance review process. You may have multiple systems out there with all those documents. You're no longer using that because you're using that process in HRT now. What do you do with those documents? So we've gone through a lot of different scenarios with clients where we extract those documents and we can then load them into HR talent in the appropriate section, right? If it's an employee appraisal or just a generic employee document, what the document type is, we can extract those and get them loaded in. And again, now that they're being stored in IDM private space, that just automatically flows over, right? So we just load the documents in, whether using the interface business classes or in some rare cases directly. We don't have to actually load them into IDM. They automatically flow over to IDM, right? So that's how you do those bulk loads of data. Now, what we've been doing to date is a little bit of config console, but mainly IPA to load these. But that's dealing with electronic documents, right? I've already got a PDF or a Word document or Excel, whatever, right? It's an electronic document, so I can load that in. You're going to have cases in some of your organizations where you have boxes of paper documents. Now, they may be old enough that you can sunset them and just take them to the shredder, but in a lot of cases, they're not. You need that audit that audit trail, you need to get those documents loaded in the system. Now you can manually scan those and load them. Small enough volume, that's probably doable. But if you've been on a lot of recent calls and about Velocity Suite, there's a solution, and RDP or RPA and IDP. So RPA is robotic process automation, and IDP is Infor document processor. They've been around before the concept of Velocity, but they're all bundled into that now. So it's not a brand new product. It's been around a couple years, but the RPA piece, along with IDP, which is Infor's OCR component that uses AI to identify the document type and everything like that. You can use those solutions under the Velocity Suite if you're dealing with paper documents that you need to get loaded, right? It will basically process, you'll still have somehow scan them in, but you can scan them in mass. And RPA will pick them up and process them through into the system. So there's a couple of different solutions to get documents loaded. It depends if you have those documents in an electronic format or if they're still paper, or you may have a little bit of both, right? So then there's conversations that can be had of using, both solutions, or, just using RPA and IDP for all of them, right? So you have options there. But if you're totally electronic, we've been doing that for a while. But if you're still dealing with a lot of paper, looking at some solutions around the Velocity Suite, maybe the better route to go. Okay, and so what are the changes for users? None. This is all underneath the covers, behind the scenes, right? So it's all about that. Where do I store the document? How do I make the application perform better? How do I get cheaper storage for the documents? Because I can have millions of them out there. So from an end user perspective, and even like an administrator or a generalist, there's no change to how you load your day-to-day documents, right? The historical document migration is a separate thing. That's a custom process. But the way you attach documents in an employee appraisal or for benefits, credentials, those types of things, they happen the same way they do today. There was a time that when they announced this, that new clients coming on, new tenants provision, would automatically store documents in IDM Private Space, right? It was just the way it was going to be going forward. But for existing clients, I think we're all pretty familiar with toggles at this point. It was basically a toggle for a while, right? So if I'm when this was released as an existing client, I had to go to my HR org and check a box to say I wanted to enable IDM, right? And so that way I could decide when I wanted to move those documents over. And then there were jobs you ran to push them over. But over time, that's all happened in the background for you, whether you knew it or not. So you may not realize you're using IDM Private Space, but as far as I've seen since towards the end of last year, I haven't seen a client that, if you go in and look, that isn't actually using the private space. And that toggle doesn't even exist on your HR org anymore, right? I think it's still there in the LPL, but it's not visible. It's just turned on. So Infor did a lot of that behind the scenes. So whether you're batch loading documents, you're just an employee is attaching their own document, et cetera, all that happens in the background. So the document gets added to HR talent. There's metadata associated with that, but then the actual the electronic document gets automatically sent over to the IDM Private Space for storage. And then you click on the document within HR talent. It's going to open the document, but because it has the metadata to talk to the IDM Private Space, it just pulls the document real time from there and opens it in your browser, right? So previously it was doing the same thing. It was just reading it from the database. So again, this is just more technical stuff under the covers of where they're storing the document. In fact, I say the end users do not need to know whether a document is in IDM or not. They can't even access the document directly in IDM, right? The way the private space works to ensure that security is in place. The only way they're going to access it is the same way they always have in HR talent. Well, we'll jump through a few screens here just to look at some different roles. So starting out, like here, I'm an employee. Again, I can go to the place in the system, like employee credentials. I can go to that area, just like always, and look at my credentials, right? So none of that's changed, but you have these additional document search screens. And what you see exactly will be dependent on your role. So here I'm showing employee, so this would allow me to search for my employee documents. Again, I'm only going to see mine. So, the documents themselves are stored in IDM, but when I do a search here, I'm really looking at the metadata, the IDM document business class, to see what documents I have. It's not until I click on the link that it actually directly interacts with IDM. So, again, as an employee, I can search all my documents here in one place instead of poking around the application because I want to see benefits documents and I want to see, then I didn't want to go to a credential or, whatever, look at my appraisal. I can easily see all my documents if I want to search. But again, the HRT security limits it for me to see mine only. And if you've customized that, that custom security should apply here. Then here's just an example as an HR administrator. You see I have more options to search for. I can search for a specific employee. I can look by name, if I have the employee number, if I'm just looking for Mike Smith, I might get multiples. So, location, org unit, et cetera. As an HR admin, the same with HR generalist. Now, the generalist security depends if it's default if you're using active org unit security. But again, the same security that was in place before is applied to all these documents that are stored in IDM. And here's just a view. So if you're go to the, pull up the application of document management, just to show an example, I could jump on live if you think I'm just filtering, but if you go there, it's connected to the default space in IDM. So you're not going to find your HR documents here, because again, they're stored in the private space and they're only available in HR talent. So just want to point that out because if you're typically an FSM user, but you do have employee stuff, right? Because you're an employee, you're wondering why you can't find your documents in IDM. That's why, because this document management application that you would typically launch to find and search for a PO or an invoice or whatever, is connected to the IDM default space, not the private space. So I've had in the past some questions about, can we use the bulk import tool to load stuff in the private space? As far as I know, the answer is no. You would go through the process like I described of loading them into HR talent and letting them flow over. In the same way, you can't browse here and find those HR documents because, again, this application connected to the default space does not have the HR talent security model like the private space does. But the way the private space is able to enforce that is it makes you access it through the HR talent application. And then for document administration, one key thing, so there was a new role added when all this came out called document admin _ST. You would have to have that to get to the document administration, but you also have to have the role admin ST, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, right? That's been around, I don't know, I think since LTM 3. Point is you have to have both roles, right? You can't just get document admin. To really be able to view everything, you need both roles. And what it allows you to do is to view all documents, right? So there could, based on your custom security and stuff, there could be some limitations on what even a generalist could see or whatever. But this role should be given out to select people, but it does let you view all documents within the private space. And it also lets you configure document sources, document source categories, and the HR organizations. And we'll look at some of those in a minute. But most important thing that's probably going to be a day-to-day for one or more administrators is to be able to go in and view any errors in the logs. So if document attributes don't match the document type between IDM and HRT for some reason, you may get some documents that are stuck there and they're in error. And you'll need to address that. Early on, you may need to open a case with Infor and ask, what needs to be done. But once you look at the logs and the errors and you get some experience, it's usually fairly apparent what the issue is. But then you have to manually process those through to get the errors handled. And then future documents that fit that same criteria should flow through normally. But, especially if you didn't realize you were even storing documents in the private space at this point, you may not be going out there to look, and you could have thousands of documents that are sitting there in error. And in that case, if somebody tries to go access that document, they're going to get an error, right? Because it's not been processed over to IDM. And I think I briefly mentioned earlier, but that the key business class that you'd look at here, if you're, when we look at some of these screens, what you're looking at is the IDM document business class. But, if you're somebody that searches instead of navigates the menus that keep changing, that's the business class you'd look for if you're in that document admin role, to be able to see all the documents and look at them, the metadata there, and any attributes or anything that you need to see from trying to resolve some of these errors. We'll jump into some of the screens. So your menu item on how you get to this may be different than what I'm showing. This is the latest, consolidated web apps and latest menus. So if you've toggled all that stuff on, you're going to be looking to find documents under the system administration area or role. If you haven't done not on the latest, you should have a role in your dropdown where it says system administration that says document administration, right? It used to be its own role, but as you do the consolidated web apps, it just moves the menus around. The screens on the right are going to be the same, but just to explain, if you're not seeing the same menu system on the left, that's why. So looking at this screen, we'll do it in a couple sections because when I took these screenshots, I was on my laptop and I couldn't get the full screen on there. So you see that documents main screen here in the middle where you can see, the most recent documents. That's actually the IDM document business class. And you can click the view all and it'll just bring you into the, default list view where you can, search through and find different documents. It's just a launch point for that in this panel. The quick links on the right is to go to the text search, document sources. This one's cut off, but it's document source categories, and then organizations, which is your HR org. And we'll step through each of those in a minute. Get the bottom half of the screen here. So any errors you have will be showing up here, right? And you can do the view all. Again, it takes you to the full list view. Same with the log. Usually pretty similar information, but sometimes the log has additional details in it. But again, so you would need to look into this and see why it's not, just double click into them, see what the issue is. Why can't I add the document to IDM? Often, like I said, either the document type doesn't exist in IDM for some reason, or the attributes are off, something like that. And you'll just need to, fix that on the back end of IDM. In most cases, if you're working with support, they'll tell you exactly what to do. But once you've fixed the issue, right, you've come in here and you looked at what the problem is, identified how to fix it. Now you would come in here and see the big blue move to IDM button. You're going to, process that through. And if you've fixed the error, the document should move through. Then any future documents of that type should just process through normally and not error out here. Ideally, if you're not adding document types or anything like that, and you've cleared up any initial errors you found in this queue, ideally you shouldn't get errors. I see it more when you add a new document type, something that you haven't been processing over and something's out of sync. So then looking at document sources, these are just, they kind of line up with your document types, right? Whether it's a credential, candidate achievement, et cetera. But then they also group them into these document source categories. And this is really just for visual and for searching, right? You can change what category these are in. You can create new categories and group them how you want. There's a out of the box setup and categorization that Infor provides, but you can, if you want to group them differently, you can. The others kind of a catch-all, but again, this really just comes into play when you're on those search screens, because you can filter on categories, right? So, a bunch of COBRA stuff makes sense. It's all in one category because I want to see all my COBRA information. I don't necessarily want to search for just one of these sources, or document sources are kind of like document types. And then categories are just a way to group them. Well, I think the next screen drills into one of these, so we'll do that. And I'll talk about the these additional, the show, preview, et cetera. So you see on the document source, this is just the generic employee document. There could be still multiple types in there, but if I want to change the category because I created a new one, I can change the category here. The IDM method is either automatic, which it should be automatic 99% of the time. There's also the other options for it are manual or off. You would probably change this if you're troubleshooting something and working with support, and you'd probably just change it to manual, and that would let you do temporarily manual processing of documents for this specific document source. And you'll see it will show a flag on the HR org unit too that works in conjunction with this. But again, in general, you're going to only change this if support's directing you, and or if you've become advanced enough and from previous support engagements, how to change it to manual and what to do after it's manual to get them processed through, and then turn it back to automatic. But again, it should typically be set to automatic at this point. And then last thing here is just the show preview image. That's just that little thumbnail that's, you see for the document. You can turn that on or off. The main reason I've seen people try to, to disable that is screen real estate, right? But, to make the list view look more like a normal list view, but by default, it's typically going to be on. And you can see the errors and logs here as well, and the individual documents that fall just in this document source. So I would typically go for that main screen for the errors and log, and process anything there. But if you're really just concerned with one document source, like employee document, and you want to be able to just see the ones for that source type, you can look at the errors and log, for employee document on this screen. Then document source categories, again, these are just groupings, color coding, as well as, categorization when you're on the search screens, because the document source category is one of the filters, right? So it allows you to easily group things together and then filter them when the employees search in, or HR admin or supervisor, whatever. So it's really just a basic grouping so that all the sources I want to assign to a category can be assigned to those. You can change the colors if you want, or create entirely new ones and then go back to the sources and reassign them. So this is coming off the Organizations tab, again, is just your HR org. You may have multiples, but you have at least one. So typically the defaults here are fine unless you're troubleshooting. You may need to come in here and change something like the sizes or something if you're getting failures because of that. But the flag I was talking about before, and I would leave the log on unless Infor asks you to turn it off. But this enable single record actions is what I was talking about previously about if you change the IDM method to manual, you have to have at least one document source set to manual or you can't enable single record actions, right? They're linked together. And again, it's really just used during troubleshooting. You don't typically want single record actions. You want all this to flow over manually. Otherwise, if you know, while you're in that state, if a bunch of documents get loaded, you're going to have to go click move to IDM to move them over, right? We typically want it just to automatically happen behind the scenes like it has been all along, whether we knew it or not. So yeah, want to make you aware of it, but you would use this parameter or this checkbox in conjunction with that IDM method set to manual, likely working with support, but just so you have a better understanding of what they may be asking you to do. And then there's an analytics view. I just moved to the other tab. The activity is what we were on. And what they're showing you is, your total documents by source. If you have a lot of different document types and document sources you've set up, graph's going to be, have more pies on more slices in the pie. But the same with errors. This is our development demo tenant. It's kind of a mess. But the upside is you get to see what a lot of errors look like. And it, just gives you a visual representation of what we were looking on those earlier screens with, looking at the documents and looking at the errors, but a visual representation to see, most of my documents in this case are employee enrollment and then next application documents, and then confirmations, right? There's a big gap between those, almost everything's between these two document types in our case. But if I actually went through and fixed most of these errors, you see there's a lot of errors that are not represented there. That would likely change, it would obviously change the percentages because I have a bunch of documents that are stuck. But I haven't addressed it in this case on this specific tenant. So here's the document management within Infor OS, in your OS tab here. So I really just showed this to point out that when you come in by default, you're going to come into the IDM space. If you have the right security, that document administrator role, you should have a second space here to change to for HCM. If you don't have all the private space security, you're going to only see IDM in here. So that would just go back to checking your roles and making sure you have the proper roles to be able to see HCM. So again, you're not going to be able to see documents in here, but in this view, you can't see FSM documents either, right? This is more the administration screen. But if I were to need to add a new document type or change attributes on a document type, like I was saying, that could be the case for a lot of the errors. This is where you'd come in to do it. To be able to find the HCM document types, you would need to make sure you switch your space to the HCM private space. The menus are going to look basically the same, right? You have document types and attributes on them and things like that. But they are unique spaces here in the administration side of IDM. So, be aware that if you're coming in here and you're only seeing IDM or you're not switching to HCM, you're only going to see FSM stuff. So if you're resolving an error or trying to fix any of those documents that are stuck in error, you need to come to the HCM private space And it will always default to the IDM one when you come in, but you can toggle if you have the right security. But again, then if you've worked in IDM for FSM, really the menu items are the same. In most cases, you're going to go to the document type and try to resolve whatever the error is. Either the document type's missing or specific attributes are wrong or missing. That is the most common that I've seen. And that is all I have. Do we have any questions, Dave? In the chat, I can't see the chat.
Yeah, we have a few. First one is, does Nordic have any experience with migrating from Ascend?
I don't know if I personally have, but it doesn't really matter what the source is, as long as they have the attributes we need. At a minimum, we'd need like the employee number, document type, and then the file. So it's not an extensive amount of information that we need, right? So the ability to extract from them, and I can ask others on the team about that specific product, but it's pretty product agnostic. They're all going to have some of that metadata, right? Because they need to know who that was before. And if the employee IDs are different, that's fine too. We can do a crosswalk, right? It's just a little more work to build it. Or maybe you have legacy employee ID filled in HRT. In that case, it's easier to use. But yeah, we can really take documents from about any system as long as they have some of the basic metadata. And I'll give you an example of some that even if they don't have employee number or something, what we've done in a couple of those scenarios, or for example, termed employees weren't brought over. So I still want that from an audit standpoint, but that employee doesn't exist in HRT. In that case, one solution we've done, and there's been others discussed, but the first one that comes to mind is like, we'll create an employee, like all nines, and give them a the highest employee number or close to it. It's basically a fake employee, and call it just historical employee, and load all those documents to it and make it so that only, like, for example, in most cases, only an HR administrator can go in and search for that, because that employee is never going to log in and look at themselves. So that's one example. If that system doesn't have the right metadata, but you still want to get the documents in, and it's a limited viewing of that document, the text and stuff can still be searched and things like that. But yeah, I need to look at what they can export. But there are solutions to get really from any system the documents loaded.
All right. The next one is, can employees see documents?
Employees can see their documents if they're using the default delivered security. I've seen scenarios where custom security restricts employees from seeing some document types, for example. So even though they can by default see all their documents, custom security can restrict it so they can't see some document types, or maybe even in one scenario, they can only see documents that they uploaded. But that's all custom. If you're using the standard Infor security around documents, they can see all of their documents, but no one else's. So they can see their benefits documents, their appraisals, et cetera. But with custom security, you can limit it, which some clients have, because they've done a migration of some old HR documents that they want to be available to administrators and tied to the employee, but not visible to the employee. But that takes security customization, but it is possible.
Right. Next one, where are the tax documents for Symmetry stored?
Mike, do you want me to answer that?
Sure.
Sorry. I just joined. So for Symmetry, there aren't really documents that are stored, attachments. So, and Mona, correct me if I'm wrong on this, from your experience. So it's an online form and that the employees fill out. And then when that is submitted, that information gets captured and it's fed over into the payroll and the other areas to update the exemptions. But when the employee, they can pull up Symmetry and the online form will pull in their information.
Right. So it's stored in Symmetry, not in HR talent.
IDM,
Right.
correct.
All right.
Did that
Next
answer?
question.
I guess, did that answer that question? I guess is want to make sure we answered it.
I feel like it did. Thumbs up. All right.
Awesome. Awesome.
What roles would you need to see that drop down for IDM and HCM? What roles would you need to see that drop down for IDM and HCM?
Yeah, well, if you have any of the IDM roles, you'll see the IDM, but you'll need to be an IDM administrator. And there may be an IDM HCM role. I'll have to look. Once we're done here, I can look and get back to you on that. But then I believe you need document administrator, ST, as well.
All right, next and final question, unless anyone has another. Can you print these documents? For example, if you were asked to provide the complete employee file for a legal case, and then print all at once versus one by one?
You can definitely print one by one because you open the document and you can print from your browser. It's an interesting question of how you would print
all at once versus one by one. Okay.
I feel like there should be a way that we could do that. It would be a customization. You're not going to be able to do that by default. Like, just print all the documents from that list view because you got to open the document to print it. I can't say 100%, but I'm like 90% that we could configure something to do that. I haven't. It's the first time that's come up, but I think it's doable, but it's not going to be there out of the box.
All right.
If we don't have a side conversation on that, feel free to reach out.
Just reach out to us and we can address anything. If you have any other questions that come up later today or next week, please reach out. If anyone's going to be at Informative Fridays, or not for Infor Connect, Mike and I will both be at Infor Connect next week. Oh, and one more. Have you seen organizations implement a fully electronic employee file using IDM?
I'm thinking. I mean, I'm trying to understand the question. I mean, if all of the documents are stored on the employee record, they would be stored in IDM Private Space. Now, an organization could still have documents outside of that, so it's really more of has the organization migrated everything into HR talent and the private space. They may be in a place where they still have a third-party system that's storing some documents. We can get them into HRT so they're all in one place, and the same with paper documents, right? When I talked about Velocity Suite and RPA and IDP, that could be used to handle paper documents, but that's really more of an organizational question. If you've migrated all of your documents into HRT, then yes, you have a complete employee record there. If you still have things sitting outside of HRT that haven't been migrated, whether they're in a file cabinet or a box or in a third-party system or just sitting on a file, file share or something, until they're migrated in, the answer would be no. But we have multiple organizations that are going through that process of getting everything loaded and converted so that it is all in HRT.
All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap the questions for today. Thanks, everyone. Again, Mike and then Kelly Gilbert, who's also on this, are both going to be at Infor Connect next week. If anyone on the call is going to be there, I'll be there too. And we look forward to seeing you if you're there. Again, thank you for attending today's session. Our next one is, Mike, if you go back a couple. Yeah, our next, actually one more up. So if you want to expand on and have additional questions, we have this offering called Coffee with a Consultant. You can schedule through emailing me, and I'll set up a call with Mike to get into a little more detail. We call it Coffee with a Consultant. It's 30 minutes of complimentary consulting on this topic or any other that you may or may not have We really look forward to, just interacting with clients and helping you solve issues and solutions within the Infor Cloud Suite, or even on S3 if you still have that. Next slide, please. Again, thank you for joining today. Our next Informative Friday is May 23rd, where we'll talk about Global Ledger Report Designer features. Finally, again, like I said, we're going to be at Infor Connect next week. If anyone's going to be there, please stop by. We also on Tuesday night are having a party where we're having dueling pianos come in, and we've got I think it's like a 2.5, 3 hour concert. So look forward to seeing you there. If you aren't registered, just stop by and see one of the 3 of us down there at the bottom. We'll all be there, and look forward to seeing you. And again, thank you for joining today, and look forward to you next Friday. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.